the first time Luce Andrade saw America. It was through the scratched window of a Greyhound bus hissing to a stop in Queens. Dawn hadn't fully arrived yet. The sky looked bruised, a deep violet turning reluctantly into gray, as if even the sun hesitated to rise on a city that so many believed glittered. Lucia stepped off the bus carrying nothing but a faded backpack and a passport that felt heavier than it should. The cold wind cut instantly through her thin jacket. She had prepared for many things, but no one had warned her how alone the air could feel here. Queens smelled like exhaust, old concrete, and the distant promise of food she couldn't yet afford. Cars passed without slowing. People brushed past her without looking, their eyes locked forward as if pulled by invisible wires. Back home in Ecuador, strangers greeted each other on the street, but here, the world moved too fast. She clutched the straps of her backpack tighter, reminding herself that this was her chance or new beginning even if the city didn't seem eager to welcome her. Her first shelter was a tiny room rented from a Colombian family who lived on the bottom floor of a crooked house near Roosevelt Avenue. The walls were thin enough for her to hear the neighbors arguing about overdue bills and late-night phone calls home. The mattress sagged inward, swallowing her small body each time she lay down, but she closed her eyes and whispered, "Gracias, Dios," because even a sagging mattress was better than sleeping on airport benches like so many others had done before her. Every morning she left before sunrise to chase any job she could find. She scrubbed stairwells in old apartment buildings, the bleach burning her nose until her eyes watered. She washed dishes in a small Peruvian restaurant where steam clung to her hair and made her clothes smell like fried fish, no matter how often she washed them. She walked dogs in icy winter rain, her fingers turning stiff and red, the leashes biting into her palms with each pull. She didn't complain. She couldn't. Each dollar mattered. Each hour brought her closer to sending money home, closer to proving that her sacrifice meant something. But survival in America was not just about labor, it was about silence. People spoke to her in English she barely understood, and she nodded even when her chest filled with confusion. She kept her head down, afraid that one wrong word, one misunderstood phrase, would send everything she'd built tumbling like a house of cards. Her mother had warned her that America was both generous and cruel, but Lucha had believed she was ready for both sides. She had been wrong. Nothing prepared her for the loneliness. The turning point of her early weeks came through a Dominican neighbor named Teresa, who noticed her carrying cleaning supplies down the hallway. Teresa had kind eyes and wore bright floral aprons even on her days off. She took one look at Lucha and said, "You need real work, Mia. Come with me tomorrow." The next morning, Teresa introduced her to a Manhattan family seeking a babysitter. They lived on the Upper West Side, in an apartment that felt too clean, too white, too silent. The child 3-year-old Emma had curls like spun gold and eyes that crinkled when she laughed. The mother interviewed Lucia briefly, barely lifting her gaze from her phone. "Can you work long hours?" she asked. Lucia nodded. "Weekends too." Another nod. "Good. She naps from 1 to 3, and she only eats organic." Her tone carried the casual sharpness of someone used to being obeyed. Still, Lucia accepted gratefully. Babysitting paid more than dishwashing, more than dog walking, more than cleaning stairwells put together. Eat me and ope. Within days, caring for Emma became the closest thing to warmth Lucia felt in America. She tied the little girl's shoes with gentle fingers, sang Spanish lullabies until the child dozed off, and carried her small body from room to room as if she were carrying the fragile remains of her own faith. When Emma laughed, something inside Lucia softened. When Emma cried, it awoke the maternal tenderness she thought she had left behind in Ecuador. With the child, she felt visible if only for moments. But with the parents, she was a ghost. They handed her envelopes of cash without meeting her eyes, left strict lists on the counter, and corrected her pronunciation of simple words with thin smiles that pretended to be polite. Lucia learned early to stay quiet, to move like mist, to make herself small in a place that seemed built to remind her how insignificant she was. The days blurred into weeks, and slowly Lucia settled into a fragile rhythm. She woke before dawn, crossed the city with commuters who never noticed her, and returned home after dark to a room that smelled of damp concrete. She cooked rice with canned beans, stretched her dollars, and whispered prayers into the night. Hope flickered inside her like a candle struggling against wind, but it still burned. Then came the incident. The one that would mark her forever. It happened on a Friday afternoon. Lucia arrived at work as usual, taking off her shoes at the door the way she always did. She played blocks with Emma, made her a snack, cleaned the kitchen carefully. She was wiping down the counter when she sensed something different in the Iran, uneasiness thick enough to touch. The mother stood in the doorway, arms folded, lips pressed into a cold line. "Lucia," she said, voice clipped, "can you come here for a moment?" Lucia nodded, wiping her hands nervously on her jeans. The mother held out a small velvet jewelry pouch. Empty. "My bracelet is missing," she said. "The one I keep in this bag. It was here yesterday. It is gone now." Lucia felt her heart drop, plummeting so fast she could almost hear it hit the floor. "Signora, I didn't. Her voice trembled so badly she could barely form words. "I need you to tell me the truth," the mother said, her tone growing sharper. "No one else was here. Just you." Lucia shook her head frantically. "I would never take anything. Never." The mother sighed, as if disappointed but unsurprised. "Please, collect your things. We won't need you anymore." The words carved themselves into Lucier's bones. She tried again, voice cracking. "Please, I didn't do it." "Lucia," the mother interrupted, "I don't want to make this formal. Just leave." "Formal." The word echoed like a threat. Lucia nodded slowly, tears burning behind her eyes, and walked out of the apartment that had once offered a glimmer of stability. The door shut behind her with a soft, cruel click. She stood in the hallway, gripping the strap of her backpack, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. This was the day America tried to break her, and though she didn't know it yet, this moment, the moment she felt most powerless, would become the seed of everything she would eventually become. That night, Lucia walked through Manhattan as if moving underwater, each step thick and heavy, as though the city itself rejected her presence. Lights that once looked magical now glared down like judgmental eyes. The cold wind slapped her cheeks, drying the tears she didn't bother wiping away. People passed her in clusters, laughing, rushing, unlocking sleek cars, completely unaware that just a few feet from them, a life had cracked in half. When she finally reached the subway station, she stopped above the entrance, staring blankly at the swirl of commuters pouring in and out. Her thoughts spun in place. She had lost jobs before, but never like this. Being accused of stealing was different. It clung to her, staining her spirit with a darkness she didn't know how to wash away. She imagined the mother whispering her suspicion to neighbors, to friends, to the doorman downstairs. In her mind's eye, the accusation spread like wildfire, and she saw her name burned to ash in a city where reputation mattered far more than truth. Down in the station, the screech of the arriving train vibrated through her skull. She stepped in and held onto the metal pole, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Every memory of the moment replayed: Emma's block scattered on the rug, the list on the counter, the mother's cold stare. She had entered that apartment with love, with patience, with the heart of someone who wanted to belong, and yet she had walked out a suspect. A disposable body. On the ride home, she kept her eyes on the floor. A man played a tinny radio too loudly. Teenagers argued about something trivial. A woman balanced grocery bags on her knees. Life continued around her, indifferent to her suffering. She wondered if this city was built on the bones of people like her, people who came with hope only to be broken quietly in corners no one noticed. When she reached her room in Queens, she collapsed onto the sagging mattress. Her hands shook as she covered her face, and for the first time since leaving Ecuador, she allowed herself to sob without restraint. The sound that came out of her was not a cry, but a release, as if months of swallowed fear and exhaustion burst through her chest at once. She cried for Emma's little arms around her neck, for the innocence of the moments they shared, for the unfairness that one accusation could erase all of it. She cried for her mother, who would ask in her next call if she was eating enough, and to whom Lucia would now have to lie. And she cried for herself because she had never felt smaller, never felt more powerless. Hours passed. A dull headache settled behind her eyes. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling, listening to the muffled arguments of neighbors, the grumbling radiator, the distant sounds of Roosevelt Avenue traffic. She tried to picture the future, but all she saw was fog. How could she find another job when her confidence had been snatched from her like that missing bracelet? At midnight, Teresa knocked gently on her door. "Mia," she whispered, "I heard you come home early. Is everything okay?" Lucia opened the door, and the moment Teresa saw her swollen eyes, she didn't ask another question. She wrapped her arms around her in a warm, maternal embrace. For a second, Lucia allowed herself to rest her forehead on Teresa's shoulder, grateful for the softness. "They said I stole," Lucia whispered, her voice cracking. "They fired me." "Just like that?" Teresa sighed deeply, guiding her to sit on the edge of the bed. "These people, they don't know us. They don't see us. You work hard. You give them your heart. But to them, we are always one step away from being the problem." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived the same pain. "But listen to me, Mia. Their accusation does not define you." Lucia nodded, but the words didn't sink in. It was hard to believe in dignity when humiliation burned so vividly in her memory. The next morning, she forced herself out of bed, even though every bone felt like it belonged to someone much older. She took the 7 train into Manhattan, not for work, but to walk the city in an attempt to remember why she came. She wandered through Central Park, where joggers passed her with earbuds in, and squirrels darted between bare trees. She watched a mother lift her toddler onto a swing, and her chest tightened painfully. Emma should have been wrapped in her scarf right now, giggling as Lucia pushed her gently. She felt herself unraveling again, and sat on a cold bench, clutching her hands together until her nails dug into her skin. Her breathing grew shallow. A small panic began to rise, the kind she had only felt once before when she said goodbye to her mother at the Cato airport, stepping onto a plane alone. Back then, she fought the fear with dreams of what she might become. But now, those dreams felt distant, almost mocking. Her chest tightened further. For a moment she wondered if she should return home. She pictured her mother's face, lined with worry, but softened with unconditional love. She imagined sitting at her family's kitchen table again, eating warm arroz con palo, hearing her sister's laughter fill the room. Going back meant safety, comfort, familiarity. It meant letting go of the cold, uncaring city that had swallowed her whole. But it also meant failure. And she wasn't sure she could live with that either. As the afternoon sun slanted through the trees, she made a decision, fragile, barely formed, but enough to steady her hands. She would not go home. Not yet. She would find work, even if it meant starting over from the bottom again. She would rebuild a routine, even if her heart felt like it had been scraped raw. She would live through this humiliation until it lost its power over her. But the universe wasn't finished testing her, because just 3 days later, while walking down a quiet street in Jackson Heights, she received a call that would strike deeper than the firing, deeper than the accusation. A call that would force her into a corner so tight she could barely breathe. Her mother had fainted back home. The doctor suspected it was her heart. Lucia stood frozen on the sidewalk, clutching the phone, her mind spinning. Her mother needed medicine they could not afford. Money had to be sent soon. But Lucia had no job, no savings, no plan. The city buzzed around her, cars honking, vendors shouting, music blasting from passing windows, but everything sounded distant, as though she were trapped behind glass. She whispered, "Mama, por favor, aguanta," then ended the call with trembling fingers. She leaned against a brick wall, letting the cold press into her back. For a moment, it felt like America had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart with an unrelenting grip. The weight of responsibility, fear, and helplessness crushed her until she slid slowly down the wall, sitting on the dirty sidewalk with her head in her hands. She had come to this country seeking a future. Now, she wasn't sure she had won it all, but somewhere beneath the crushing despair, something small and stubborn flickered. A faint ember of defiance. A whisper saying she was not done yet. She wiped her tears, stood slowly, and took a shaky breath. What? Se divi. Tino then was that this moment, this breaking point would become the gateway to the most unexpected transformation of her life. 4 days after the call about her mother, Lucia moved through life as if the world were wrapped in thick fog. She woke at dawn, not because she had work, but because fear dragged her out of bed before the alarm. She paced her small room, opening her phone again and again, waiting for news from Ecuador. Each message from her sister sent her heart skittering. Mauma está descansando. El doctor quiere más exámenes. Tenemos que pagar mañana. Every update felt like a deadline she wasn't ready for. Money. The word stalked her every waking moment. She applied for jobs everywhere, restaurants, laundromats, cleaning companies, but each place replied with the same phrases. We're not hiring. Maybe next month. Fill out the form and wait for a call. She didn't have a month. She didn't even have a week. She felt time slipping through her fingers like sand, mocking her desperation. On the 4th day after the call, she returned to Manhattan to look for work face to face, hoping someone's sympathy might override their skepticism. She walked past high-rise buildings with glass facades that reflected her tiny figure back at her, reminding her of how insignificant she seemed. She pushed open the door of a bakery, then a cafe, then a florist, each time receiving polite rejection or thinly veiled disinterest. When night fell, she was exhausted, but unwilling to return home empty-handed. She wandered into a playground she used to take Emma to, sitting on a cold metal bench near the swings. The empty chains clinked softly in the wind, a lonely sound that echoed the hollow place in her chest. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old pictures. Emma, smiling with chocolate smeared on her face. The view from her small window back home in Ecuador, her mother's gentle eyes. She lingered on her mother's photo the longest. It was taken on the day Lucia left for America. Her mother had forced a smile for the camera, but Lucia remembered the tears she had wiped away just minutes before boarding the plane. Has que valga la pena, her mother had whispered. Make it worth it. Lucia whispered to the photo now. I'm trying. Mama, I'm really trying. Her voice cracked, and she looked away quickly as if someone might see her vulnerability. She stared at the playground, remembering the laughter of the children she had watched, the small victories she had celebrated with them, first steps, new words, tiny discoveries about the world. She loved children. Caring for them had always come naturally, instinctively. Even when the parents dismissed her, the children didn't. They saw her. They trusted her. They loved her without conditions. A thought sparked, small, fragile, but undeniable. I could watch children here. Not in fancy apartments, not for cold families who treat me like smoke, but for mothers like me, women who work double shifts, women who live on the edge every day. She straightened slowly, as if the universe had just whispered a secret in her ear. The idea felt impossible. She had no license, no space, no money, but she had experience, patience, heart, and she had nothing left to lose. The next morning she went to the public library, rubbing her hands together to warm them as she walked inside. The computers lined up and rows hummed softly, and she claimed an empty seat in the corner. She typed into the search bar, how to start babysitting business in New York. Though her English was still shaky, she clicked through websites, scribbling notes on scrap paper. The words blurred sometimes, but she persisted. She learned she could start small, very small, without a license, as long as she watched only 1 or 2 children at a time in her own home. She didn't have much space, but she had a room, and that was enough for now. That afternoon, she printed simple flyers at the library. Experienced caregiver available, loving and safe home, affordable. She added her phone number in neat handwriting, then walked through Jackson Heights, taping them to lampposts, grocery store windows, laundromat bulletin boards. She tucked flyers into the hands of mothers leaving daycare centers, offering a shy smile each time. Some women nodded politely. Others didn't even glance at her. But one did. Her name was Marisol, a Mexican mother with tired eyes and a toddler perched on her hip. She paused after reading the flyer, looking Lucia over with a mixture of caution and curiosity. You watch niñas? She asked. Lucia nodded. Sí, en mi casa. Con cuidado, con cariño. En Marisol hesitated, shifting her daughter on her hip. I work nights. My sitter canceled last minute. I don't have many options. Lucia felt her pulse quicken. I can help. You can come see my place. If you don't like it, está bien. Marisol studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. I will come tonight. When Marisol arrived with her little girl, Lucia Sart raced. She had cleaned her room thoroughly, laying out a soft blanket, a few toys she managed to buy from a dollar store, and the small lamp that cast warm light across the walls. It wasn't much, but it felt gentle, safe, something she hoped a mother could sense. Marisol stepped inside cautiously, scanning the space, lifting a toy to inspect it. Finally, she exhaled. You seem good, she said quietly. My daughter likes you. The toddler was already reaching for Lucia's hands. Can you start tomorrow? Lucia nodded, swallowing the relief, threatening to spill into tears. Yes, of course. That night, when Marisol stepped out and Lucia was alone again, she sat on the edge of her bed and let out a long, shaky breath. It wasn't a job in a skyscraper. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something she created herself. The next day she cared for Marisol's daughter as if the child were a fragile piece of her own heart. She sang softly, fed her warm food, held her when she cried. When Marisol returned at midnight, exhausted from her shift, she found her daughter sleeping peacefully on the blanket. You're good with her, Marisol whispered, pulling bills from her pocket. Better than the sitter I used to have. Lucia didn't know it yet, but that night lit the match that would ignite her future. Because the very next week, Marisol told 2 other mothers about her, and within 2 months, Lucia would be caring for 3 children at once, her room filled with toys, laughter, and the scent of warm milk. And all the while, she saved every dollar, sending what she could to Ecuador, praying each night for her mother's recovery. She was still at the bottom, still struggling. But for the first time since arriving in America, she wasn't sinking. She was building. In the months that followed, Lucia's small room transformed into something unrecognizable. What had once been a cramped space, holding only a bed and a suitcase, now pulsed with life. Bright toys scattered across the floor. Picture books stacked in lopsided piles. Plastic cups drying beside the sink. The children filled the air with laughter. With tantrums, with the unpredictable music of early childhood. Te were load mesi. Demandinande kept her alive. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. She fed the children warm meals, soothed them through fevers, taught them colors and shapes in both Spanish and English. Sometimes the mothers would arrive to find their children sleeping peacefully on the blanket Lucia had spread across the floor, the lamp casting golden light over their small bodies. They often lingered, whispering gratitude, their tired eyes softening in a way that reminded Lucia of the women in her own family. Word spread quietly, carried through the immigrant grapevine, like a secret people wanted to protect. Soon, Lucia had more requests than she could possibly take. Dominican mothers, Colombian mothers, Bangladeshi mothers, Ecuadorian mothers, all came with the same mixture of exhaustion and hope. They needed someone trustworthy, someone gentle, someone who understood what it meant to work 2 jobs, to live with fear in your chest, to choose between groceries and rent. Lucia became that person for them. But growth came with pressure. Her room was too small. The building landlord began to notice the constant stream of children. He knocked one afternoon, his voice harsh, accusing her of turning the space into a business without permission. Lucia's heart jumped into her throat. She apologized, not daring to argue, promising to keep everything under control. When he left, she sat on the bed with her head in her hands, fear pressing heavy against her ribs. If she was forced to stop, everything would collapse: her income, her mother's medication, her fragile hope. That night, as 3 children slept in a row beside her, she made a decision that felt reckless and necessary. She would move. She would find a bigger apartment, something she could legally use for childcare. It felt impossible, but staying where she was felt more dangerous. The next morning, she toured a small 2-bedroom apartment 10 blocks away. The floors creaked, and the paint peeled in corners, but sunlight streamed through the windows in warm sheets. She imagined play mats covering the floor, toys neatly organized in bins, walls decorated with colorful posters. She imagined laughter echoing through the rooms without fear of the landlord's fist pounding the door. The rent was impossible, but survival had taught her that impossibility could sometimes be negotiated. She met the landlord, a middle-aged Indian man with kind eyes named Mr. Patel. She explained her situation in nervous, imperfect English, offering every reference she had, emphasizing her steady-paying clients, her reliability, her carefulness. He listened quietly, tapping his fingers against the table. When she finally finished, breathless, he studied her for a long moment, then said, "You remind me of my mother. She also came here with nothing. I will reduce the deposit. You pay the rest in installments." Lucia nearly cried from relief. Within a week she moved into the new apartment with the help of 3 mothers who insisted on carrying boxers to fathers who brought tools to assemble shelves, and Teresa who supervised the chaos like a general leading an army. When they finished, the space looked modest, but full of potential. A tiny daycare waiting to be born. But as soon as she opened her doors again, a new challenge emerged. Running a childcare service from her home meant navigating a maze of regulations, some strict, some vague, some impossible to decipher. English forms made her dizzy. Phone calls with city offices left her stumbling through sentences, embarrassed and frustrated. Still, she pressed on, spending nights at the library reading guidelines, watching tutorials, joining online forums for caregivers. Slowly, painfully, she learned. She created daily schedules. She implemented safety rules. She organized toys by age group. She kept logs of meals and naps. She transformed from a good babysitter into a disciplined caregiver. Mothers noticed the change. They trusted her more, recommended her with confidence, called Erla. Mejor. Her income grew, not fast, not dramatically, but enough to breathe, enough to send her mother money regularly, enough to begin saving tiny amounts at first, then more, then more. Still, the fear never fully left her. The memory of being falsely accused haunted her. She moved through each day with a quiet vigilance, making sure every corner of her home was spotless, every belonging accounted for. She refused to let even a shadow of risk jeopardize what she was building. One afternoon, nearly a year after the accusation, she received a call from Mary. "Lucia," she said breathlessly, "the community center is hosting a workshop for small business owners. They teach everything: licenses, funding, taxes." I told them about you. Lucia's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't feel like a business owner. She was just a woman trying to survive. But Marisol insisted, and something inside Lucia whispered that maybe it was time to stop surviving and start growing. The workshop was held in a bright room, filled with immigrant entrepreneurs, older women selling handmade food, young men starting repair businesses, mothers launching online shops. Lucia sat among them, heart pounding. The instructor spoke clearly, explaining how small businesses could get certified, how grants worked, how to apply for official daycare licensing. Lucia took pages of notes, her handwriting shaky but determined. Each sentence opened a new possibility. She felt her chest warm with a strange, unfamiliar sensation, not hope but something stronger: ambition. At the end of the workshop, the instructor, a Puerto Rican woman with silver-streaked hair named Elena, approached her. "I could see your focus," she said. "What do you do?" "I take care of niños," Lucia replied softly. "In my home?" Elena smiled warmly. "Then you should get licensed. You have the heart for it." The heart? Yes, but did she have the strength? For the next 6 months, she dedicated herself to the licensing process: home inspections, CPR certification, safety upgrades, paperwork thick enough to feel like a second job. There were days she wanted to give up. Nights she cried in frustration over forms she couldn't understand. But she had already survived worse. She pressed forward, step by step, fueled by the image of her mother standing proudly in front of a daycare sign with her daughter's name on it. When the license finally arrived, a crisp paper with her name printed neatly at the top, Lucia held it in her trembling hands for a long time, feeling its weight, its truth. She had done this. Her, the girl who arrived with nothing but a backpack, a handful of dollars, and a bruised spirit. The news spread quickly through the community. More mothers came tinty, then neighbors of neighbors. Soon, she had a waiting list. She hired her first assistant, a quiet Peruvian woman named Alicia, who worked with gentle efficiency. The apartment buzzed with activity from morning to night, and Lucia found herself supervising with the calm confidence of someone who finally believed she belonged. But her biggest breakthrough arrived unexpectedly, on a day when she was cleaning toys after the children left. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Hello. Hello. Lucia letters I was given your name by a parent at PS 149. We're looking for a reliable childcare provider for a community program. Are you available to meet? She stared at the message, heart pounding. PS 149 was a public school and institution she had once walked past, dreaming of being good enough to collaborate with, and now they were reaching out to her. She typed back with trembling fingers. Yes, I am available. She didn't know it yet, but that meeting would mark the beginning of her greatest expansion, the path that would turn her small apartment daycare into something far bigger than she had ever imagined. The meeting at PS 149 took place on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air feels thin and hopeful. Lucia arrived early, wearing her best blouse even though the seam near the shoulder had been stitched and restitched more times than she could count. She sat on a bench outside the school, watching children run past with backpacks bouncing against their small bodies, their laughter fluttering like bright flags. Each sound reminded her of the little ones she cared for, of the warmth they gave her during the coldest moments of her life. A woman stepped outside, scanning the sidewalk until her eyes landed on Lucia letters. You must be Ms. Andrade, she said. I am Principal Howard. Lucia rose quickly, shaking her hand with a mixture of nerves and quiet pride. They walked inside, the hallways decorated with colorful murals that pressed gently against her heart. They sat in a modest office, filled with stacks of papers and the hum of an old radiator. Principal Howard explained the school's need for aftercare support, a safe space for children whose parents worked late. She spoke of budget constraints, of challenges, of the need for someone reliable and community. Your name came up again and again, the principal said. Parents trust you. That matters more than anything. Trust. A word she had once believed she could lose forever. Lucia listened carefully. When the principal asked if she'd be willing to partner with the school, she felt her throat tighten. She nodded, unable to speak at first. When her voice finally emerged, it trembled. I would be honored. The partnership transformed everything. Within weeks, Lucia expanded into a small rented space near the school. She filled it with soft rugs, bookshelves, toy bins, art supplies, and the smell of fresh paint. Parents who had once handed her children with uncertainty now greeted her with warm smiles, sometimes dropping off homemade food as gifts. Para que sigas creciendo, they'd say. To help you keep growing. Her mother, now stable and recovering, watched through video calls as Lucia walked through the bright new space, showing each corner as if it were a miracle. Estoy orgullosa de ti, her mother whispered, pressing her hand to the screen. Nunca dudé. Lucia swallowed tears each time. She wished she could hug her mother, wished she could feel the familiar scent of eucalyptus and homemade soup, but even from thousands of miles away, her mother's pride wrapped around her like a shawl. The demand continued to grow. The small space near the school became too small. Tend to next, and then the next. Over the following years, Lucia opened more center small, welcoming rooms filled with child-sized tables, sensory corners, bilingual story times, and the kind of warmth that traveled by word of mouth faster than any advertisement. Immigrant mothers trusted her, teachers respected her, and community leaders began inviting her to speak about early childhood education. She always spoke softly, with humility, but her words carried weight because they were rooted in truth carved from pain, survival, and relentless work. She talked about the loneliness of arriving in America, the fear of false accusations, the humiliation that nearly sent her home. She talked about the moment she realized her worth did not depend on the approval of those who never looked her in the eye. And she talked about the children, their innocence, their potential, their need for love that could not be stored in any ledger. One evening, after a long day, she sat in her office, now a real office, with her name on the door and looked through old documents she had kept in a small box. Among them was one of the original library flyers she had printed years ago. The ink was faded, her handwriting shaky. She stared at it for a long time, remembering the version of herself who had taped it to a lamppost with trembling fingers, hoping anyone would believe in her. She whispered into the quiet room, "Mama, I made it worth it." But America hadn't offered forgiveness so easily. Life had one more thread to close. It happened on a spring morning when she visited the Upper West Side for the first time in years. She had avoided the area consciously, as if it remained a wound she didn't want to reopen. But she had a meeting nearby, and Fator's something like it drew her down a familiar street. The building where she once babysat stood unchanged, tall and immaculate. Her feet slowed, her breath caught. Memories flooded her. Emma's tiny hands, reaching for her. The mother's cold eyes, the empty velvet pouch. For a moment she felt the old fear return, the fear of being seen as less than human. But she was not the woman she used to be. She was no longer the girl trembling in a hallway with a backpack held close to her chest. She stepped inside. The doorman, now a different man than years ago, looked up politely. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Lucia inhaled deeply. I worked here once," she said. "A long time ago." Her voice softened. "I just wanted to see it again." The doorman nodded kindly, sensing something unspoken. "You're welcome to wait in the lobby if you like." She sat on one of the polished chairs. The lobby bathed in quiet luxury that once made her feel invisible. Now, it felt distant, almost foreign. She closed her eyes, exhaling a piece of grief she had carried for too long. She wasn't seeking confrontation or justice. She wasn't seeking apologies from people who never cared. She was reclaiming herself. After a few minutes, she stood, thanked the doorman, and walked back into the sunlight. Her steps felt lighter than they had in years. As the years went on, her centers flourished. Investors approached her. Grants were awarded. Her business became a recognizable name in Queens, one associated not with wealth, but with service, with compassion, with dignity. She hired dozens of women who reminded her of herself, immigrants with tired eyes, but fierce spirits. She trained them, empowered them, paid them fairly. "We rise together," she would say. "Nunca solas." One chilly December morning, as she prepared to cut the ribbon at the opening of her 6th Centata, large community-focused facility, offering free workshops and subsidized childcare, Lucia paused behind the curtain. She listened to the crowd gathering outside. Parents, teachers, community leaders, children whose laughter echoed like bells. Teresa stood beside her, older now, but as warm as ever. "Mira dónde estás, mija," she whispered. "Todo lo sufriste." Y mírate a Lucia took a slow breath. When the curtain lifted, the crowd erupted in applause. She walked forward, no longer invisible, no longer small. She stood beneath the banner with her name on a tondrade. Early Learning Centerand felt every version of herself gathering at her back. The frightened girl with the torn backpack. The babysitter accused of a crime she didn't commit. The young woman crying in tiny rooms. The caregiver learning regulations at 2 a.m. The daughter praying for her mother's health. She lifted the ceremonial scissors, her hands steady. "This," she said softly into the microphone, voice trembling with emotion, "is for every woman who came to this country with nothing but hope, for every mother who worked double shifts, for every caregiver who was never seen. You deserve space. You deserve respect. You deserve a future." She cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered. Tears slid down her cheek, stares, not of sadness, but of triumph. America had tried to break her, but in the pressure, she had shaped herself into something unshakable. A creator, a leader, a millionaire born from nothing but courage, compassion, and the refusal to disappear. And as she stepped into the new center, surrounded by children's laughter and the warmth of her community, she understood at last, she had not just survived America, she had transformed it, one child, one mother, one quiet victory at a time.